Hi guys, Jamie here from JB Motion. In today's video, we're going to be proving Isaac Newton wrong and making an apple fall upwards. So as you can see, we have an apple which I have placed into the scene using Cinema 4D and Redshift. Before I did any of that, I tracked my camera inside of After Effects, exported it to Cinema 4D where I placed in my apple. Now the apple we can find in the content browser, we're not going to be creating that from scratch. Rendered everything out, brought it back into After Effects for some finishing touches like color correcting and all that good stuff. We're going to get this done in about an hour, so without further ado, let's get started on this. Here we go. Okay guys, so starting off, you're going to want to download the Apple's video from the description below. So we're going to be jumping into After Effects first of all, and let's grab our video and drag it into the project panel here. So if we hit Ctrl-Alt-G, we can just check that the frame rate is 30 frames per second. We need to know that for when we jump into Cinema 4D. And we want to drag this into the composition icon here so that it's going to create a composition for us. So now you can see that this is our video. And we need to track the camera for this. So let's go, first of all, we'll do a file, save as, and we'll save this into, I have a folder set up, Apple Compositing. Let's just save this as Apple Comp. And now we can go ahead and track the camera. So make sure that the comp and the layer is selected, go to animation and track camera. So that's going to do its business, so I'll pause the video here and we'll pop back in once that's done. Cool, okay, so that's done and you can see we have a bunch of track points that are tracking along various pixels in our shot. So we need to create a track camera and to do that, we're going to hover around this area here. And the reason I'm hovering around this kind of price tag area here to create my camera is just because this price board looks quite reliable with regards to something to track. The apples have a lot of reflections on them. It shouldn't be an issue to create a track solid and a camera based off of the track points on the apples, but just to be on the safe side, I'm going to do it here. So right click, once the target looks like it's kind of placed against that sign there, just right click, go to create solid and camera. So that's created for us a 3D tracker camera and a track solid. We can select this layer, hit S on our keyboard, and we can just scale this down. And if we just watch that back, you'll see that that looks pretty good with regards to the track. There's no slipping or anything like that. So that's fine. Now, we're going to create another track solid, and we're going to do that. If we click on the Apple's video layer, click on the 3D camera tracker, we're going to position it where we want our apple to be. So from the intro video, you'll remember that we had the apple around here. So I'm going to hover around here till we find a target that is going to get as close to around here as possible. Right click and create solid. So this created another track solid for us. And we can scale this down also. So this is going to be where our apple is going to be. So we could even just rename this to Apple Track Solid. And if we just play that back, again, you'll see that that's nice and firm in position, no slipping and sliding. Okay, cool. So we can do a file or Control S to save this. And now what we can do is go File, Export, and Max on Cinema 4D Exporter. So this might take a while for you guys to see it, this little message here, because I paused the video. It took a while to load. So if you do go to File, Export, Max on Cinema 4D Exporter, and it doesn't do anything at the start, just give it some time. and it should pop up after a minute or two. So click OK on this, and we're going to save this out to the Apple Compositing folder that I've set up. We'll just call this Apple Camera Tracked. And click on Save. Now, before we jump into Cinema, we are going to have to render this out as an image sequence if we want to be able to load it into the Redshift camera background so that we can see it playback in our Cinema 4D viewport. So to do that, click on this little composition here, go to Comp, add to render queue, select output modules, select PNG sequence, click OK, and we're going to output this to a folder I've already set up, and I already have this done. But just put it into a folder, turn off save in subfolder, because you already have it in a folder, and just click on save. And then hit render. I'm not going to do that now because I already have this done. And that's going to render this out as an image sequence for you. Take a few minutes to do that. But while you're waiting on that, if your machine allows it, what you can do is just jump into Cinema. Now, my machine isn't the best, so I'm going to File, Save this. Now, you guys are probably still rendering your image sequence, so just ignore this step. And if your machine allows it, we can now start working in Cinema while we're waiting for that image sequence. So I'm going to open up the Apple's Camera Tracked Cinema 4D file that we just exported from After Effects. So here we have our 2 track solids and the camera. There's our camera, and it's moving along just as we did when we were shooting it in the supermarket. So I've noticed that creating a Redshift camera, because if we're going to be using Redshift to render this out, which we are, I'll set this to Redshift now, we're not going to be able to use this 3D camera tracker or 3D tracker camera. We can, but we're not going to have the background tab. And we need the background tab so that we can add our movie sequence that we're currently rendering out, our rendered image sequence that we're currently rendering out of After Effects. Well, you guys are. I've already rendered it out. And the glitch that I found is that, and I don't know if it's a glitch, but let's just say if I select this, it has all its keyframes. And then if I create a Redshift camera, now all the keyframes from here are gone, and it looks like they've been pasted here. The only problem is both of these cameras are in different positions. So if I hit play, you can see that that just kind of jumps out of position. So I don't know why that's happening. It would be nice if it didn't do that. And I'm not sure why it does happen. But a workaround I've found, now you guys might not need this workaround. This could be just a glitch that I'm getting. But if I just close this, say no, I don't want to save anything, and I'm going to open that up again. So now everything's back to as it was when I exported it from After Effects. So the workaround I found is I just go to create a new project, make sure the renderer is set to Redshift, create a Redshift camera. I hit Control-C and bring it in here, Control-V that in. And now you can see that I've created a Redshift camera in my project. It doesn't have any keyframes, and my 3D camera tracker still has its keyframes. So now I'm able to make this a child of the 3D tracker camera, hit Alt-0, which is just a shortcut for Reset Transform. So now that's going to reposition itself to align with the 3D tracker camera. But you can see that if I hop out here, you can see that it's still not using the same settings as the standard camera. So what we need to do is go into our 3D tracker camera, go to Object, grab the focal length, Control-C, and paste that into the focal length in our Redshift camera. We need to go back in and grab the field of view horizontal, Control C that into the angle of view of our Redshift camera, the first one. And then we need to grab the vertical field of view, copy that into the second one of our angle of view in our Redshift camera. And also we need to get our focus distance, copy that into the optical tab in our focus distance here in our Redshift camera. And now you can see everything is aligned. So now if we hit play on this and we switch between cameras, they are one and the same. So again, I'm not sure if there's an easier way of doing that. It seems a bit higgledy-piggledy, but if you guys have an easier way of doing that, or if it's just my machine, just let me know in the comments below. I'd be interested to know how it's working for everybody else. So now that we have our Redshift camera set up, let's just save. Now we're able to bring in the image sequence so that we can see our video playback in our viewport. Let's make sure that our renderer is set to Redshift. And make sure that your After Effects has finished rendering out that image sequence. So we can go into, if it has, we go into our Redshift camera, go to the background tab, click on override, and we can grab the movie sequence here. Any of these frames, double click in it, say no. And we need to go to image, go to the animation tab, set this to simple, 30 frames per second. Now Cinema automatically sets up with that setting, frame rate setting. And okay, back into animation, simple, and we need to click on detect frames. So now we can play this back. And I'm going to turn off the work plane. And I'll just let this all load into cache. So as you can see, everything's looking good. So now we can go about creating our apple. Well, we don't have to create it. There's one in the content browser, which makes it all the more easier. So if I just load the apple up here. Now hopefully you guys have this apple. I'm not sure how if it's included in all licensing packages or whatever. But this Redshift apple, I'm going to grab this, and here we have it. So we can't see it. It's very small, and it's like over here. You can actually see it a little bit. But we want to align it to this track solid 1. No, this track solid here. So we're going to drag it down, make it a child of that, and the shortcut for reset transform is Alt-0 on your keyboard. So you can see it's jumped now to the position of our track solid. We can unchild it and scale it up, as it's quite small. Let's rotate it as well and push it down a bit so that it's kind of like sitting into this track solid. Something like that. So we can turn off this track solid now, and if we just play that back, you can see that there's our apple, and it is sitting in there nicely. So what I want to do next is rebuild this pallet that all the apples are sitting in, this cardboard pallet. And the reason I want to do that is so that we're going to be able to get some nice contact shadows for the apple as it's sitting in the pallet. So let's deactivate this camera. We'll do a file, save, and we are going to create a cube, make it a child of this apple null, hit Alt-0, and we'll bring that back out so that it's no longer a child of that apple null. And we're just going to scale this up, and we can check what this is looking like. So we can just try and make it about the same size as the palette. And we can rotate it kind of like this, so that it's kind of better aligned with the pallet, I suppose. Something like that. And we want to create a cloner. We're going to clone a bunch of spheres, okay? So let's grab a sphere. And we're going to align it to the apple also. So bring it into be a child of the apple null, hit Alt 0, bring it back out. And let's scale this up. We'll jump into a 4-way view here, hit Alt. Now, make sure this camera is deselected before you do this. Hit Alt S on your keyboard so that it's going to zoom in on each of our viewports. It's going to zoom in to center the sphere so we can align that nice and easily. And we'll scale this up. So we want it to be bigger than our apple, something like that. And now we can kind of push this cube up. And you'll see what I'm doing now in a minute. You can probably already figure it out. We're going to clone this sphere. So we want to reset the rotational coordinates. Or no, actually we don't want to do that. Ignore that step. We're going to create this cloner. Hold down Alt with the sphere selected. It'll automatically be added as a child. We want to align this cloner with the cube. So make it a child of the cube. Hit Alt 0. Now we can bring this cloner up. And we're going to set in the cloner, in the object tab, set the mode to honeycomb and the orientation to XZ. And now we can just kind of like drag this out, or we could do it here even. Drag these out. And we have, hang on, let's count how many like holes we have. Let's turn this off for a second, turn all this stuff off. So we have like 1, 2, 3, 4 down along there, and then we have like 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. So we want to replicate that. 1, 2, 3, 4. So we have 1 too many there. So now we have, let's turn this down. So now we have 4, and we have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. Okay, so that's about right. And we need to push this down a bit and increase the size width here and the size height as well. Because, like, you know, we want there to be a bit more of a gap between each of these spheres. So let's have a look at what this is looking like now. So let's just grab this cube and this cloner, and we need to put these into a volume mesher and a volume builder. So the volume mesher needs to be a child of the volume builder. Do a file save again. And the cube and the cloner both need to be children. Let's take this out of there. The cloner needs to be a child of the volume mesher. So too does the cube. The cloner needs to be on the top. And if we go into the volume mesher here, into the volume, this is the wrong order, sorry, no. The volume builder needs to be on top. So the volume builder needs to be a child of the volume mesher. Okay. The volume mesher needs to be the parent. The volume builder needs to be the child. Oh, say no. Do you want to adjust the volume size? Yes. Let's take that out. Let's try this again. So the cloner is a child of the volume builder. and the cube is also a child of the volume builder. The cloner needs to be on top. And if we jump in here, the cloner needs to be on top here also. And we want to subtract the cloner from the cube. So let's play around with the voxel size in the volume builder. Set this to like 10, maybe 8. Okay on that. And if we add an SDF smooth onto this to smoothen it all out. So you can see where I'm going with this. It took me a while to get there with all that messing. So apologies for the confusion. So just to confirm, the volume mesher is the top parent and the volume builder is the child. Then the children of the volume builder are what we're working with to build out the mesh. So if we go into the volume builder, in the object tab, we need the cloner on top so that we can subtract it from the cube. So it is looking something like this. We can push the cloner up a bit, down a bit maybe. Like that. And let's just see if we can use this. Okay, so hit NB on your keyboard. This mesh is super dense, okay? So what we need to do is we need to duplicate this because we want to keep this one just in case we need to go back to it to make any changes. But I'm just going to turn all of this off. And in this one, we can middle mouse click so that we select the top parent and all of the children, right click and go connect objects and delete. Now we have this palette, this Apple palette, we'll say. Not sure how to spell palette, but anyway. And we have this dense mesh. So we need to use the remesher or the remesh with the Apple palette object selected. Hold down Alt and grab a remesh. That'll automatically add the Apple palette as a child of it. And we can bring this mesh density way down to like 20%. That's going to process, so I'll pause the video here while that's doing its business. Okay, so that's still very dense. We can go down here even more. I'd go down to like 5%. And it's still quite dense, so I'd even go down to 3%. And even if it's not, even if it's still too dense, I'm just going to leave it as is. Okay, so that's looking pretty good. We can middle mouse click on this and we can right click, go to connect objects and delete. So we have our new Apple palette and Apple palette. Okay. So if we just grab this, click on X-ray, and we can just turn this off actually to have a look at everything like with regards to position. So we want to just kind of make sure that one of these circles, we'll go for this one, is kind of lined up nicely with, hang on, let me grab it. Nope, it's not going to let me grab it. We want it to be, say, this circle, this this container, we want it to contain this apple. We want to line this container area with kind of this, let's hide the apple, with this container area here. So I'll undo all that. And also, something else we will notice is we have a bend here as well. So this is bent upwards. So we want to try and replicate that as well. So let's grab a bend. So let's grab a bend deformer. Select this, hold down Shift this time. I'm going to grab a bend deformer. It'll automatically add as a child of the selected object. If we click on Fit to Parent, did that do anything? No, it doesn't. Let's just increase the bend and see what happens. Okay, so it's bending it up kind of in the right position. Let's rotate the bend deformer. And we can scale this up, increase the strength, maybe move it around a bit. Something like that is maybe even bend it a bit more. Something like that, okay? And then maybe that's too bent. Yeah, maybe like that. And then we just need to reposition this whole thing because it's all been moved around. So I'm just gonna like kind of reposition this so that if I hide this apple, and I'll turn on the track solid here so that the track solid is kind of just over the circle part that we want to put the apple into. Oh, don't want to move that. So something like if I just switch to world coordinate system, does that help me to reposition this at all? Not really. Jump into our top view. Turn off my lines. NA on your keyboard to turn off your lines. Okay. So this is the dodgiest alignment ever, but it still might work. Because remember, we're not going to see this. We just want this. We are not going to see any of this. We're just going to see the contact shadows of our apple. And hopefully it's going to look the part once we might scale it down a bit. Bring it back up. Hopefully it's going to look the part. Oh, I'm after messing it all up now. Okay. So hopefully this will look the part once we have our apple in there. So we'll bring back our apple. And if we just deactivate our camera for a second, kind of position this apple a bit better so it's sitting in that cup more snug. Nice and snug. We might scale up our apple a bit even more. Get that in there nice and snug. Okay, so for lighting, we're going to just do a file save project. We'll create a dome light for now. And I want to find an appropriate dome light to kind of like best suit the scene here. Let's grab a HDRI and let's zoom in on this. We need something that's kind of inside lighting. I don't know if there's even one available. This one could do Glow Kitchen maybe. We'll try that. You guys might have to download that. And we want to do a file save, save, keep saving, never stop saving. Redshift. And let's hit play on this and see what it's looking like. Okay, so obviously we don't want to see this palette. We only want to see these shadows, which are looking pretty nice. So if we go to our palette, where are you, palette? Right click on this, go to render tags, grab a Redshift object tab, go to the matte tab, turn on override, general, and shadows are enabled. And also we want to, if we switch to our alpha view, it's not affecting the alpha, we need to turn this on so that it does affect the alpha. Go back here. So now you can see that this is looking pretty good. With regards to contact shadows, which is all we care about, We don't care about any other part of this palette. It's looking pretty nice. The apple seems a bit big compared to the other apples, so if I just scale that down, and I could like push it down a little bit as well. So yeah, okay, it's looking very snug in there. We want to get rid of all this nastiness that you can see, so that's basically the palette is casting its own shadows, so we don't want it to do that. In the Apple palette, go to the Redshift object tag and go to visibility, override that, and turn off cast shadows. So now it's not casting any shadows, it's just receiving the shadows. Turn off this dome light, you can see the nice shadows that we're getting. Hang on a second. Okay. So that doesn't look right. It's not cast shadows we want to turn off, it is self shadows we want to turn off. You can see that's actually much better than the previous setup we had there. So cast shadows remains turned on, just the self shadows is what we want to turn off. Okay, so the apple, it's not looking like the other apples. We need to go to our dome light and increase the intensity of the lighting here. Bring that up to about there maybe. And we want to go into our apple material and bring down the reflection weight just a bit to kind of better tie in with the other apples. And if we look at all these apples, they have like an overhead, there's a reflection there being reflected from an overhead light. So we can replicate that. We jump into standard, we're going to do a file save, and let's deactivate the camera. And we want to create an area light, and let's just set a target tag on this and make the apple, where's the apple? Make the apple the target object. So we can bring this up overhead. So that'll be pointing straight down at the apple. And we can bring that up and scale it up a bit. And if we jump back into our Redshift camera now, into the Redshift view, to Redshift render view. Okay, so we need to, what do we need to do? We need to, let's make sure that the Redshift camera is locked so we can deactivate the camera and we can still see our render. We bring this light down, not that far. So you can see we're getting that highlight now, but it's in the wrong position. Let's take away this target tag. We don't need that anymore. Let's bring this over here. I'm going to scale this up. And I'm going to bring down the intensity of this. So like, that's kind of a bit closer, I suppose. I'll bring down the intensity a bit more. Like that, is exposure. Bring that up. Oh, no. No, don't mess with the exposure, it's fine as it is. So yeah, that's looking pretty close position-wise to the other ones. So like with regards to the roughness of this reflection, it isn't looking, you know, it's not rough enough. So if we open this up, if we look at this here, we'll see that the roughness is being driven by this scalar ramp. So if I just zoom in on this scalar ramp is driving the roughness. So if we just kind of like disconnect that, and then we have access to like, Now we are disconnecting that, so therefore this texture is no longer playing a part in the roughness. I wonder if we were to just connect if we just connected this texture directly to the roughness. No, that's not going to work. But now that we've disconnected the roughness from this scalar ramp here, we now are able to control the roughness manually. So we can kind of like get it, yeah, it's looking a lot better now with regards to that. We can even increase the intensity of this light, I'd say. So now that specular highlight is looking a lot closer. Do we have, yeah, I think we have a few of these lights as well. This dome light can probably come down in intensity to kind of balance out the new area light that we have. And we can maybe scale this up even more, this area light. No, we don't want to do that. Actually, if we normalize the intensity, no, I'm just going to have to scale it up. We'll leave it as is. We can just duplicate this. Maybe duplicate it, drag it over this way. So then we're going to get like 2 specular highlights. Because there are 2 here. There's like 1 there and 1 there. Something like that. I think that's looking pretty good. So we'll do another file save project. Okay, so we're going to jump into standard. We can fix, this does look a bit overexposed, but we can fix this in After Effects. We're going to jump into standard, go back into our Redshift camera, and we'll have a look at this. So we want this apple to kind of float up into space, we'll say. So it's defying the laws of gravity. Newton, the apple went the other way. All right, that's what we're going for here. So we're going to do a file save project. I'm actually going to do a save project as and uprovise this because we're going and starting to mess with dynamics now, and that could mess up our whole scene. So it's good to uprovise to avoid, we can always jump back if needs be. So our apple, we are going to middle mouse click, right click, connect objects and delete. So we just have one single piece of geometry for our apple. And we are going to right click on this, go to simulation tags and add a rigid body tag. For the palette, we are going to right click on this, simulation tags, and add a collider tag. So now if we hit play on that, so our apple kind of jumps around at the start. If we just deactivate the camera here, you'll see that the apple, it must be intersecting with the pallet because, you know, it's jumping around there at the start. I mean, it's a very small jump. Would you even notice it? You would, I suppose. So we want to kind of grab our apple, and let's hit NB on our keyboard so we can see our lines. So it looks like it's kind of intersecting there a bit. What we could do is let it rest. So it rests at about frame 37. So if we go back to like minus 40, and then if we hit play, by the time it gets to frame 0, it's already rested. So that's one way we could figure that out. Our background video, our video is no longer playing back for us. I don't know why. That could be because I did that. Just jump into Redshift and see if it's happening in Redshift. Okay, so it's fine in Redshift, so I don't really care. I'll turn both of these track solids off. Yeah, that's okay in Redshift, so I'm not really that bothered about it. So So I'll ignore that. That doesn't matter. So, okay, so that jumps in, and then we want the apple to then start floating up into the sky as to prove Isaac Newton wrong. That's what we're going for here. Isaac Newton got it wrong. So this apple now is going to start floating up. So at about frame 0, we want to add a keyframe. We want to go into our project settings. So do Control S to save, first of all. Control D, then to open up the project settings, go to Simulation tab, and under Simulation, or no, under Scene, you'll find Gravity. So let's add a keyframe on frame 0, and we're going to slowly take away the gravity. So maybe around here, gravity will change to plus 981 and add a keyframe. So now, is the apple going to start floating up? We will see, hopefully so. No, it's not floating up. So why is that? Why is that apple not floating up? So I'm going to try this a different way, because I was looking at this. So keyframing gravity isn't working. I might be doing something wrong with that. But let me try this a different way. So if I just delete the keyframes I created for gravity from our timeline, excuse me, and if we go to our rigid body tag, and instead of keyframing gravity, I'm going to set the initial gravity to be, sorry, not my rigid body tag, Control D to go to my project settings, in the simulation tag. In scene, I'm going to set the gravity to be like 400. And now hopefully the apple will start to rise. Okay, it does. So that's working, but we don't want it to start straight away because we're just trying to keyframe it so it would start kind of around it would start around, I suppose now that we're doing that, we don't need to have the minus 40 because it no longer settles into position. It's just in that position, isn't it? So we don't need to do that anymore. So instead of it immediately taking off, I want to disable dynamics. Yeah, so I want to disable dynamics, and I don't want it to do anything until, we'll say, the camera gets to around here. Let's just close this. Until our camera gets to around here, we'll say, around frame 115 or something like that. And then I want to add a keyframe, go to the following keyframe, and then enable dynamics and add another keyframe. So now our apple is going to start floating up. Okay, so it would be nice if we could still see. I don't know why that viewport thing isn't there anymore. Okay, so maybe that floats up a bit too quickly. Hit Control D, and I'm going to go to the Simulation tab. In the Scene tab, I'm going to set the gravity to like 200. So that'll slow that down. Cool. And if we jump into Redshift to see what that's looking like. Okay. So moving on, what do we have? We have, let's have a look. I'll just fit this to the window. So we have, if I just do a file save. So that starts flying up. Is that not flying up anymore? Okay, it is. It's just taking a while. So that starts flying up. I want to get a shot of it just before it kind of takes off. So around there. Ah, I missed my chance. Let me try again. It is around there. Okay, so that's where it starts taking off. Yeah, I just want to see those shadows. They're looking really nice. Yeah, that's looking good. Okay, so now we can cache the simulation. So let's just go back. And we go to, let's close this materials tab. Go to the Apple, the simulation, the rigid body tag. And we can cache this by going to the cache tab and clicking on cache scene. Okay, so now that that's cached, it floats up, we can scrub all along and all that good stuff. And I also would like to, let's just make sure this is looking okay at various points. Yeah, it's looking pretty good. I'd like to add a bit of rotation to it as it floats up as well. So at the point at which the dynamics kicks in, maybe around here, I'm going to add some rotation keyframes here. On the Apple, scrub along to the very last few frames, we'll say. Maybe just the last frame. And with the Apple selected, now I want to select the entire Apple. So I'll deselect the current selection and make sure I'm in object mode. I'm going to, I'm going to add some rotation to this, so like some random rotation. Add some keyframes, see what that looks like. Do a file save. This would be better to view in standard. Cool, okay, so that's pretty cool. And we'll just check this out at various frames in the render view. Cool. Okay, guys, I'm happy with that. So I'm going to set this up for render. Do a file save. And we are going to, first of all, just get this ready in the Redshift viewport. So original size, everything's looking good. Fit to window. So we don't want any background. So go to your dome light. Turn off that. And the Redshift camera, we don't want to have a background there either. Turn that off. And if we go to our alpha channel, you can see that we're getting shadows cast where we need them. And everything else is transparent. So that's good to go. So we will go into our render settings now. Go to output, it's 1920 by 1080. We're rendering out all frames. We're going to save this as a PNG sequence. Oh, we need to make sure that alpha channel is turned on. We don't need multipass. we're going to go and save this to our folder, Apple Compositing folder, sequence. And yeah, well, this is going to be our Apple sequence 1. Save that. So for Redshift render settings, I'm not going to change anything. I think it's fine. I mean, do we need motion blur? It's moving very slowly. We'll turn it on anyway. You always have a bit of motion blur, I suppose. And that is, that's good to go. Okay, so we'll do a file, save project, and we'll render this to picture viewer just so we can see how long it's going to be taking us per frame. Now, obviously, it's going to vary for everybody depending on your machine, but failed to retrieve dome lighting data. Okay. I don't see any issues anyway. It looks like that message is going to pop up every single frame. I don't know why that's happening, but it's still rendering and it looks good to me. Oh, it actually doesn't. So let's stop this. Stop that. I don't know why the dome light isn't working. This isn't the problem I want to fix though. The problem I want to fix, because this is, Cinema's ignoring this anyway, but the problem I want to fix is the Apple. So if I just show you what I mean, Shift F6, see those jagged edges? See those jagged edges? We don't want those jagged edges. We want this Apple to be nice and smooth. So we're going to go to our Apple in our Redshift object tag. We're going to go to the Geometry tab, turn on Override Geometry, and turn on Tessellation. So now if we do a File, Save Project, and render that again to Picture Viewer, say yes, we're going to override everything, ignore these warnings. Now we are going to have a nice smoothened out Apple. I actually just set that to the Apple palette, so apologies. We need to add a Redshift object tag to our Apple. Go into Geometry, turn on Override, and turn that on. Make sure I turn this back off. So that was a silly mistake. Yeah, so Apple has the Redshift object tag with the tessellation turned on for the Apple. So let's File, Save, and start rendering this to Picture Viewer. So now we have our nice smoothened out Apple edges. And that's looking pretty good. Cool, guys. So that is rendering out at about 10 to 12 seconds per frame. Okay, guys, stop everything. Just stop your render. So I just rendered this out in full and I noticed something that's basically ruined my entire render. So I had to fix it and render it out again. So the problem was that if I just go into my dope sheet here and look at the camera, the 3D tracker camera that I brought in from After Effects, just zoom out on this, hit tab so we can look at the curves. And then if we zoom in here, you're gonna see we're getting this jumping. So see the way like this goes from here all the way down to here, this craziness, okay? So it is making frames wherever this happens, and it happens at a number of places. Now, I've seen this before, all right. I've seen After Effects export cameras like this before, so it's not the first time. But you can see, like, if we want motion blur turned on, we're going to have to go ahead and manually fix all of these. So just like lasso selecting them, dragging them down to kind of line up with what appears to be the right line, I suppose. So you'd have to do all that. So what I'm going to do instead is I'm just going to turn off motion blur. Now, because our Apple is moving super slow, you know, we don't really need motion blur. We can always add it a bit in After Effects if we really needed it, but we don't. Now, if this was a scene where I had a lot of fast moving objects and I did need motion blur, I would go ahead and fix these frames. But that's not the case for this, so I'm just turning off motion blur. But yeah, so then it's just a case of doing a file. Once you have motion blur turned off, file, save, and then render that out to picture viewer. I'm not going to do that because I've already done it. So I'm going to, we'll close down Cinema because I've already rendered this out. Now you guys are probably going to have to wait for your render to be finished before we can jump into this next part. I'm just going to close this down, say no to that, jump into After Effects, and we are going to bring in our rendered sequence. So I have it here. Make sure PNG sequence is selected and just grab any one of these frames. That'll bring in the entire sequence. We can bring it down to our composition. We can turn off these track solids. We don't need to see those anymore. And this is our render. So as you can see, it's looking pretty cool, pretty realistic. Shadow is okay. It's not the best looking shadow, but you can see like it's definitely selling it. The apple looks pretty sweet. Everything looks good. We just need to kind of fix the, well, do you need to? You could kind of, let's see. You know, there's a bit of overlap here, but I think it's like so small I wouldn't even bother about doing any masks there or anything like that. I think that's fine. So we do want to kind of fix the colors a bit. So let's go select our layer, our sequence, and grab a Lumetri color, double click on that. As long as the sequence is selected, it'll automatically add the effect to the layer. Let's go to basic correction and we can increase the exposure a little bit. Let's see. So that looks a bit closer. Zoom out a bit. Maybe increase the contrast just a bit. And we would also want to add some Gaussian blur to this, because if we zoom in, that's like super crispy clear and these are all blurred. So let's add some blur on this as well. Something like that looks pretty close to what we have. And finally, you're going to see that we have some shadow over here. So we might need to do a mask there. We could try and use the rotor brush. So let's just try that now. We'll do a file save. And if we want to rotor brush these apples, instead of having to mask this and keyframe it by hand, we can try the rotor brush tool. So let's double click on this layer. Oh no, sorry, not that layer. Our video layer. Double click on that and grab your rotor brush tool and let's just kind of select these apples. Okay, so you can see that it's kind of like done a pretty good job at highlighting the apples there. So now if we hit play, which is just spacebar, and this should start kind of calculating everything. So you can see now that each frame is being calculated and After Effects is trying its best to kind of keep this pink mask, I suppose, this pink line, which is going to mask the apples. It's doing a really good job, actually, of just kind of staying on the edges of those apples. So we won't need to worry about masking this by hand, which would take a lot longer, obviously. So I'm going to pause the video here, and we'll come back in once this has done its business. enough. Well, I might not even need to actually, because I think at this stage the apple's already started to float up. But we'll let it go a little bit longer. I might just let it go to around like 10 seconds or something, and then I'll come back in and we'll do the next step. Okay, wait, so you can see that it's kind of lost the edges of the apple there. So if I just go back to about there. So if you hold down Control and press the right arrow key on your keyboard, or the left, you'll be able to go frame by frame, one frame forward or one frame backwards. So if we go to the frame where it loses the edges, then grab the rotor brush tool again, and then just kind of redraw around the edges of those apples to get that back in. Then if you hit play again on the space bar, it'll just kind of reset itself again, and then you can keep loading it all in. Okay, so I think this is done enough, because again, like I said, the apple's probably already up in the air now at this stage. So I'm going to hit space bar, and I'm going to hit freeze. And that is going to basically freeze the mask in the position that it has processed to be in. Yeah, I don't know how to say that. But anyway, it's just basically, it's like baking it, I suppose. So this is going to take maybe a minute or two. So I'll pause the video here again, and we'll pop back in once that's done. Okay, so that's finished freezing, and it actually froze it actually did the entire sequence. What you might want to do to stop it from doing the whole thing is like add one of these little set out points to current time. I think that will make the timeline indicator stop there. But anyway, I have the whole thing now, so it doesn't really matter anyway, I suppose. So this is what I have. So we can now put this layer on top of our apple sequence. Put that up the top. So now that the shadow is going to be underneath this. So if I turn that off, the shadow is being hidden by these apples here, which is good. And then we can duplicate this, Control D, hold down Control Shift and press the left square bracket to bring it down to the bottom. And then we can just delete the rotor brush from that. And now we have it. So let's let this load into cache so we can watch it back in full. Cool, so that's it, guys. Thanks to all of you guys for sticking around till the very end. I know it was a bit of a long one. It went on a bit longer than I had hoped, but hope you guys learned a lot. If you did, please do consider subscribing to my channel and hit that like button. Also, don't forget to drop me a comment on any other tutorial ideas you might have. That's it from me, and we will see you guys in the next video. Thanks for watching. Bye-bye.